You hear a child crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in that small, confused way children cry when they don't understand what's happening to them. And when you look closer, you see her. A little girl dressed in silk, gold threaded into her gown, something heavy resting on her head that she doesn't realize is a crown, because she is too young to understand what it means. She is 7 years old, and today she is being told that she is special, that she is important, that she is about to become a queen. And no one tells her that she is also being traded, that her life is being decided in a room she will never enter, between men who will never know her name beyond what it represents. Because long before she walked into that church, long before the candles were lit and the music began, her future had already been written like a contract. And that contract didn't describe a wedding. It described a transaction. Because at this point in history, 2 kingdoms were exhausted. Years of war had drained them of everything: money, land, people, hope. And peace was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. But peace in that world didn't come from forgiveness or understanding. It came from exchange. And the most reliable thing you could exchange was not gold, not land, not power, but a child. Because a child could be shaped, controlled, moved, and most importantly, sacrificed without consequence. And that is how she became the solution. A living agreement between 2 sides that no longer trusted each other. And when she stood there in that church, holding something that was too heavy for her small hands to understand, everyone around her saw a symbol, not a person. They saw an alliance, a guarantee, a promise that neither side would break the peace. Because breaking it would mean destroying the life of the very thing they had just exchanged. And so she smiled, the way children do when they are told to smile, repeating words she didn't fully understand, because that's what they taught her. That this was good, that this was an honor, that she should feel proud. And maybe part of her believed it, because children are good at believing the stories adults tell them, especially when those stories are all they have. But what no one said out loud, what no one ever wrote in the official records, was that her life had just been divided into outcomes, possibilities calculated not in years or memories, but in value. If she lived, she was useful. If she died, she was still useful. Every version of her future had already been priced. And that is what makes this different from the fairy tales we are used to. Because fairy tales pretend that the crown is the reward. But in reality, the crown was the cost. And what followed was not a life of power, but a life of isolation. Because the moment she left everything she knew, her home, her language, her family, she became something else entirely, not fully belonging to where she came from, and never fully accepted where she arrived. A presence in a place that would never feel like hers, surrounded by people who served her, but did not know her. In rooms filled with luxury that could not replace something as simple as being understood. And this is where the story takes a turn that history rarely talks about. Because despite everything, despite the system that created this situation, the man she was given to was not what anyone expected. He did not treat her like a wife. He did not rush what the world around them had planned. Instead, he treated her like what she actually was, a child. He spoke to her gently, brought her small things that made her smile, sat with her, listened to her. And for the first time since she had been taken from everything familiar, she felt something close to comfort. Not because her situation had changed, but because someone within it chose not to make it worse. And that detail matters, because it makes what happens next harder to accept. Because just when her world began to feel slightly less cold, it was taken from her again. Without warning, without explanation she could understand. The one person who had treated her with kindness was gone, removed by the same kind of power that had placed her there in the first place. And suddenly she was alone again. But this time, it was worse. Because now she understood what she had lost. And what replaced it was not kindness, not patience, but control. Decisions made around her, about her, without her. Her belongings taken. Her identity reduced even further. Her future once again rewritten by people who saw her as a piece on a board, rather than a person with a voice. And this is where the story stops being about history and starts being about something more uncomfortable. Because what happened to her wasn't rare. It wasn't an exception. It was a system.
Repeated over and over again, normalized to the point where no one questioned it. And the only thing that made her different was that we are still talking about her, while so many others were erased completely. And maybe the most unsettling part of all of this is not what was done to her, but how easily it was justified, how quickly it was accepted, how quietly it was recorded, because in the end she was never meant to have a choice. She was never meant to have control. She was never meant to be remembered as anything more than a solution to someone else's problem. And yet here we are, centuries later, still hearing that small cry, still trying to understand how something like this could happen, and realizing that the answer is much simpler